Nathaniel Greywick knelt on Eugenia Ashford's parlor rug and held out the pearl button torn from Verity's wedding glove. 3 months earlier, he had sent his bride north before the wedding candles had burned out. Now he had crossed England with mud on his boots to ask for the hand he had refused. Verity did not step back, but she did not close her fingers around his either. The mud was drying on his heavy blue traveling coat. It flaked onto the fine Edinburgh wool beneath his knees. Verity stood by the tall window, one hand pressed lightly against her heart. Morning light turned the plain white linen of her gown almost silver. Behind them, near the open parlor door, Eugenia Ashford stood frozen. Beside her, Alexander Ellington, the solicitor, held a leather portfolio against his chest. They were old enough to understand the brutal weight of a duke on his knees, and wise enough not to make a sound. Verity looked down at the pearl button in Nathaniel's palm. She did not look at his face. She had not worn that glove in 3 months. She had folded it into a trunk and put the trunk beneath the bed she had not chosen. So why had he brought back the missing piece? "I kept it," Nathaniel said. His voice was not the polished, cutting drawl of the Duke of Greywick. It was hoarse. The mud on his boots spoke of a man who had ridden through the night, left his carriage behind when the roads turned soft, and arrived without the dignity he had once guarded more closely than his heart. Verity observed the tremor in his fingers. She felt nothing at first, only the cold draft from the window, only the small ache in her palm, where memory placed a torn glove. The same hand he was begging for now was the hand he had dismissed as a stain on his name. She did not scream. She did not demand an explanation. Her voice, when it came, was flat and dry. "Your boots are ruining my aunt's rug, Your Grace." It was not a deflection, it was an anchor. She would not let him drown her in sudden apologies, simply because he had chosen to kneel. Nathaniel flinched the sharpest movement he had made. He lowered his hand, but he did not rise. He was a man who worshipped order. The Duke of Greywick did not tolerate dust, let alone scandal. Yet here he was, dragging the filth of the road into her quiet exile. Why? What truth had finally outrun him? She had not yet heard the worst of it. 3 months ago, the world had been perfectly arranged. Greywick Chapel had smelled of old stone and expensive wax. Verity had stood at the altar in an ivory gown, her hands encased in the gloves her mother had embroidered with tiny pearls. She was a ward burdened by her late father's debts, and she had been handed over by settlement. Nathaniel had stood beside her, flawless and cold. He had recited the vows with chilling correctness. There had been no warmth in his tone, but no cruelty either. He sounded like a man who had wound himself to duty and dared not let the clock stop. He had not looked at her lips, he had looked at the priest. In the family pew, Lysander Wycliffe, Nathaniel's cousin, had watched them with a small, sharp smile. Beside him sat Lady Delia Brandon, the polished woman society had expected Nathaniel to marry. Verity had held her breath. She had known she was a transaction, but as Nathaniel slid the ring onto her gloved finger, a heavy, unbidden hope had settled in her chest. Perhaps in the quiet of his massive estate she could carve out one corner to breathe. Perhaps he would let her teach. Then the note had arrived. They were barely out of the chapel doors when a servant handed Nathaniel a sealed letter. Verity watched his face. The Duke of Greywick did not show shock. His expression simply turned to frost. He read the words, folded the paper sharply, and placed it in his coat. He did not show her the note. He did not ask her a single question. He merely turned to Lysander, his voice clipping the air like shears. "Have the carriage brought round to the side door. The Duchess will be departing." Verity had not known what the letter said, but she had known what his silence meant. He had chosen the clean arrangement of immediate exile over the disorder of asking her for the truth. The wedding candles were still smoking in the great hall when Nathaniel came to her chamber. She was still in her gown. "You will leave for Edinburgh before dawn," he said, standing entirely outside the threshold. He did not cross into her room. "It is a temporary arrangement, to protect the name, to prevent gossip." Verity stood by the fire. The light shivered along his sleeve. "To protect the name from what, Your Grace?" Her voice was steady, though her hands were cold. "A claim has been made," Nathaniel said, looking past her shoulder. "An accusation regarding your fitness to hold the title. Until I can settle the matter quietly, you cannot remain here." He thought she would weep. He expected collapse, pleading some desperate oath of innocence offered to a man who had not asked for it. Verity did none of those things. She recognized the trap. If she begged, she accepted the premise that she was a subject to be judged. "Do you mean to hear my answer?" she asked.
"Not tonight," he replied. His jaw tightened. "The carriage is ready." He stepped forward then, offering his arm to lead her down the back stairs. It was a mock courtesy. A gentleman leading a prisoner to the block. Verity reached out. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. But as he looked away, she felt the insulting dismissal in his frame. She was not a wife. She was a problem to be moved before the household woke. She pulled her hand back. The fabric of her glove caught on his silver cufflink. The silk tore. A single pearl button snapped off and struck the floorboards with a sharp. Nathaniel looked down at it. He did not pick it up. Not while she was watching. "Thank you for the cloak," Verity said to the housekeeper waiting in the hall. Then she walked down the stairs alone. She left him standing in the doorway of a marriage he had ended before it began. She had not shed a tear on the long road north. Tears were for people who had lost something. She had simply learned that silence was the only property they could not confiscate. Yet here he was, kneeling inside the silence she had built. In Eugenia's parlor, the present reasserted itself. Nathaniel slowly lowered the hand holding the button. "I did not come to command you back, Verity," he said quietly. It was the first time he had used her Christian name without a title attached to it. It jarred her. She tightened her hand against her chest and smoothed the linen of her gown. "Eugenia," from the doorway, "Your Grace has 1 hour in this house. The parlor door remains open." She turned sharply and walked down the hall, Alexander Ellington following her like a shadow. They were alone, but entirely visible. Nathaniel stood. He brushed the dried mud from his knees, a futile gesture that only made his disarray more obvious. He looked around the room, taking in the plain furniture, the worn carpet, the little work-basket near the hearth. It was not the gilded cage of a duchess. It was a house that worked for its keep. "I expected you to be..." He stopped. "Ruined," Verity offered. "Mourning." "Hiding." "Angry," he said softly. "Anger requires energy, Your Grace. I found I needed mine for other things." She walked toward the double doors leading to the north wing. She did not ask him to follow, but the gravity of her movement pulled him. He stepped into the corridor behind her. The silence of the house broke abruptly. From the far end of the wing came the norna of young voices and the scratching of chalk on slate. Nathaniel stopped. "What is that?" "My exile," Verity said. She pushed open the heavy oak door. The room was flooded with light. 10 girls varying in age sat at long wooden tables. They wore the rough spun wool of tenant families. Before each of them lay a slate, a piece of chalk, and a small bound copybook. They were reciting the alphabet. Not just letters, but words. Words from land leases, words from apprenticeship papers, words from employment contracts. Verity had not spent 3 months staring at the wall. She had reopened her late mother's reading school. She was teaching girls to read the papers that might one day dictate their lives, so no one could trap them with a signature they did not understand.
A small girl near the front dropped her slate, it on the floorboards. The child froze, eyes wide with terror, at the tall, dark-coated man in the doorway. Nathaniel moved before he thought. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside the girl. His boots sounded heavy against the boards, but his hand was careful when he picked up the slate. He did not hand it back immediately. He looked at the chalk marks. It was a messy, unsteady attempt at spelling the word tenant. He wiped a smear of dust from the edge and returned it. "Your cross on the T is very straight," he said. The girl blinked. Then she took the slate. Nathaniel stood. He did not step farther into the room. He turned to Verity and waited. He was asking permission to remain. Verity felt a sudden ache in her ribs. He was not looking at her with pity. He was looking at the ink stain on her right index finger. He was looking at the copybooks stacked in her arms. He was looking at a woman who had built a fortress out of scraps. She gave him the single, slight nod. He, as if he had held that breath all the way from London. Then he stepped back into the corridor, giving her space to close the classroom door. "You did not waste away," he murmured, staring at the closed wood. "I could not afford to." Verity kept her hands clasped before her. "If I stopped moving, I would have to remember that I was moved here, like an unwanted piece of furniture. I prefer to be a person." The words were not raised. They still struck him. Nathaniel reached into his pocket and drew out the pearl button again. "I did not find this on the floor after you left," he said, his voice roughened. "I picked it up the moment you turned your back. I have carried it in my watch pocket every day since." Verity stared at the small, gleaming sphere. "Why?" "Because it was the only piece of truth I had left." His composure fractured. Not loudly, not in any way a crowd would have understood, but Verity saw it, in the slight break of his mouth, in the rigid hand that could not quite close. "The note Lysander handed me at the chapel claimed you had met a man in secret before the wedding," Nathaniel said. "It claimed you had given another man a right to speak over your honor. It said you were unfit for the title." Verity's chin lifted. She did not gasp. She did not defend herself. She let the ugliness of the lie hang in the air and made him look at it. "And you believed him," she said. "No." Nathaniel's hands clenched at his sides. "No, Verity. I did not believe him. That is the sin of it." He looked away, staring at the peeling wallpaper, as if it had become a confession. "My father nearly destroyed the Greywick name. He drowned in debt scandal and women who laughed at my mother in her own drawing room. I spent my life building walls to keep the rot out. I learned that affection makes a man careless. Carelessness destroys everything." He turned his dark, haunted eyes back to her. "When Lysander gave me that note, I knew it was a lie. I knew. But if I challenged him in the chapel, there would be questions. Servants would talk, families would write. The scandal would attach itself to the name before I could cut it away. So I chose order. I chose to hide you until I could silence him quietly." He swallowed. "I chose the clean arrangement over you." Verity did not move. "I thought I was saving the house," he said. "Looking at you now, I know I was only saving my own cowardice." He was not asking for pardon. That made it harder. Verity looked at him. Really looked. She saw the rigid posture, the frayed edge of his cravat, the mud drying at the hem of his coat. She saw a man terrified of darkness, who had locked himself in a windowless room and called it safety. "You can arrange every chair in a house, Your Grace," she said softly, "and still make it a prison." Nathaniel closed his eyes. He did not argue. He simply bowed his head and accepted the blow. But holding a mirror to him forced Verity to look at herself. She glanced down at her ink-stained fingers. "This house." Her voice faltered for the first time. She swallowed hard. "This house was not peaceful when I arrived. It was silent. So silent that I could hear my own heart beating, and I hated the sound of it." She forced herself to meet his gaze. She would not cry. "I had to fill this wing with those girls. I had to teach them. Because if I did not hear their voices, I would drown in the silence you left me in." Nathaniel stepped toward her. His hand rose by instinct, not command. He meant to comfort, perhaps to touch her sleeve, perhaps to repair 1 inch of what could not be repaired by touch. Verity stepped back. The barrier returned. The sound of carriage wheels crunching on the gravel outside broke the moment. Footsteps echoed in the front hall. Alexander Ellington appeared at the end of the corridor, his face grave. "Your Grace, Madam, forgive the intrusion." He looked at Nathaniel. "A courier has arrived from Greywick. It concerns Lord Wycliffe." The air shifted from private grief to public threat. "Speak, Ellington," Nathaniel said. The Duke returned to his voice, though the man beneath it was still raw. "Lord Wycliffe is using the Michaelmas Rent Day Assembly next week," Ellington said, unfolding the dispatch. "He intends to raise the matter before the tenants and local gentry. He is spreading the report that the Duchess's absence proves the marriage is dishonored, and he means to press Your Grace to repudiate her publicly." Verity felt the cold wash over her. Lysander was not satisfied with her exile. He wanted her erased. Ellington hesitated. "There is more. Lord Wycliffe has been visiting the Brandon estate. He is positioning Lady Delia as the appropriate replacement, should Your Grace seek a separation, and put the matter before higher authority." The silence in the corridor was absolute. Nathaniel turned to Verity. Panic flashed in his eyes, then vanished beneath procedure. He became a general surveying a battlefield. "Pack your things," he said quickly. "I will have a carriage brought round. You will return to Greywick with me under my direct protection. I will place men at your door. Ellington will draft a statement refuting every claim. We will arrange this so that he cannot touch you." It was a perfect plan. Neat, safe, exactly what he had done on their wedding night. Verity heard the prison door closing. He was arranging the chairs again. He would put her in a carriage, hide her behind authority, and solve the problem with paper and guards. She would be a prized object retrieved from storage and dusted for display. "No," she said. Nathaniel stopped. "Verity, you do not understand the danger. Lysander intends to humiliate you in public. I can stop him, but I need you safely inside Greywick walls." "I will not be moved twice, Your Grace." Her voice dropped into cold iron. "You sent me away in the dark to protect your name. I will not be smuggled back in the dark to save it." "It is not about the name," his temper snapped. "It is about protecting you. By locking me away again." She stepped toward him. The restraint in her voice gained an edge at last. "If I return under your guard, hiding behind your solicitor, I accept his premise. I accept that I am something dirty that must be protected from the light." She pointed toward the classroom door. "Those girls in there hear me say every day that they have a right to know what is written about them. If I hide now, I am a hypocrite." Nathaniel stared at her. The impulse to seize control,
To put her in the safest carriage and settle the matter by force of rank warred visibly with the new terror of silencing her again. Before he could answer, the front knocker sounded. A moment later, Eugenia appeared unsettled, despite every effort to look composed. "There is a lady here to see you, Verity. She traveled in the courier's carriage." Lady Delia Brandon stepped into the hall. She looked exhausted. Her traveling pelisse was wrinkled, and the feathers on her bonnet had collapsed in the rain. She stopped when she saw Nathaniel, but she addressed Verity. "Your Grace," Delia said, her voice trembling. "I beg pardon for the intrusion. I could not let him do it." Verity did not invite her closer. Delia clasped her gloved hands. "Lord Wycliffe has been at my father's house every day. He told them your marriage was a sham."
He said you would be cast off before Michaelmas, and that Nathaniel would need a clean bride. The phrase struck the corridor like spilled ink. Delia looked down.
"I am not brave," she continued. "I do not want to be caught in scandal, but I saw Lysander pay a servant to deliver a note to the chapel on your wedding day. He prepared the lie before the vows were even spoken. He needed Nathaniel to fear it long enough to send you away."
Nathaniel's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. He had been played. His worship of order had made him a puppet. Delia looked up, her eyes pleading.
"If you do not come to the assembly, they will make your absence into proof. They will say silence is confession."
Verity absorbed the words. The trap was perfect. She turned to Nathaniel. He was waiting, not commanding, not arranging. He gripped the edge of the hallway table, his knuckles white, forcing himself to hold still. "What must return mean for you, Verity?" he asked. The question was a surrender of power. Verity looked at him and saw the Duke of Greywick trying to break his own rules. "It means," she said, "that I will go to Greywick. But I will not hide in your carriage. I will not stand behind your guards. And you will not ask me to be silent while men discuss my honor." Nathaniel let out a harsh breath. Then he nodded once. "I will never ask you to be silent again." The journey south was not a reconciliation. It was an alignment. They rode in the same carriage, but they did not touch. The tension between them was no longer cold. It was alive, dangerous, and too honest to be comfortable. When they stopped at inns, Nathaniel did not order her meals. He waited for her to speak to the innkeeper. When they reviewed the girls' copybooks, which Verity had brought with her, he did not correct her accounts. He sat beside her, the sleeve of his coat brushing hers, and asked how many slates the school would require before winter. They were learning a shared rhythm. They spoke through work, because the wedding night was still too raw to touch directly. Near the border road, the carriage struck a rut hard enough to throw Verity sideways. Nathaniel caught her before she struck the door. His hand closed around her wrist. His other palm braced the seat beside her hip. For one suspended second, he was too near. She felt the heat of him through the thin linen of her sleeve. She saw his throat move as he forced himself not to tighten his hold. Then he released her at once, not because he wished to, because he remembered. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was low, almost rough. Verity's wrist still carried the shape of his fingers. She looked down at her hand, then at the small distance he had put between them, as if it cost him something physical. "You prevented a bruise," she said. "I have caused enough of those that cannot be seen." The carriage wheels groaned back into motion. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. But the air had changed. At the second inn, he noticed she did not drink the tea until it cooled. "You prefer it without milk," he said. Verity looked at him. "I noticed in the parlor," he added. "You stirred it only to have something to do with your hands." It was a small thing. Almost nothing. But for 3 months she had lived as a woman no one had bothered to ask a question of. A man noticing how she took tea felt more dangerous than any apology. She looked away first. As Greywick Estate rose on the horizon, the pressure thickened. The Michaelmas Assembly was held in the grand public square of Greywick Village, bordered by the estate's outer walls. It was a centuries-old custom, a day when leases were read, grievances heard, and rents recorded before witnesses. Today, the county had gathered not for leases, but for blood. Tenants, local gentry, merchants, and servants stood shoulder to shoulder. Lysander Wycliffe waited on the raised stone dais, looking grave and entirely victorious. When Nathaniel's carriage arrived, a hush fell over the square. Nathaniel stepped out first. He wore black. He looked every inch the ruthless, untouchable Duke of Greywick. He turned and offered his hand. Verity stepped down. She did not wear the heavy silks of a duchess. She wore the plain, dark blue traveling gown of a teacher. She kept her head high. She did not take his hand to steady herself. She walked beside him. A whisper ran through the crowd. Damaged goods. The stained bride. Lysander stepped forward as they reached the dais. "Your Grace," he said, his voice carrying over the square. "We had hoped you would come alone, to spare the county the embarrassment of this unresolved matter." Nathaniel did not look at him. He turned his body slightly, not in front of Verity, but beside her. "There is no unresolved matter, Lysander." His voice was not loud, but it cut through the square. "The rumors," Lysander began. "You will call her Her Grace," Nathaniel said. Lysander's mouth tightened. A murmur moved through the crowd. Nathaniel had not struck him. He had not shouted. Yet he had drawn a line before every witness present. Lysander recovered quickly. "We only seek to protect the Greywick name," he said. "If Her Grace cannot answer the report against her, then surely the estate must consider what course is proper." The crowd murmured. It was the logic Nathaniel had always lived by. Order over truth. Name over person. Nathaniel looked out at his tenants. Then he looked at Verity. "The Greywick name," he said, his voice rising, "was disgraced 3 months ago." The square fell silent. Lysander smiled. He thought he had won. "It was disgraced," Nathaniel continued, "by me." Lysander's smile vanished. Nathaniel stepped forward, exposing himself entirely to the crowd. "I received a whispered lie on my wedding day. Because I was a coward. Because I feared scandal more than I valued honor, I sent my wife away in the dark without asking her a single question. I did not protect the name. I soiled it with my own fear." He turned his eyes on Lysander. "There will be no weighing of the Duchess's virtue in this square. No woman under my name will have her honor measured by a coward's whisper." He looked back at the crowd. "Lady Delia Brandon has given a signed statement, witnessed by Mr. Ellington. Lord Wycliffe contrived the note delivered at the chapel. He meant to force a separation for his own advantage." The square erupted in shocked murmurs. Lysander took a step back, pale beneath his practiced composure. The clean, neat trap had been shattered by the Duke taking the mud upon himself. Nathaniel had cleared the air. He had destroyed the mechanism that judged her. But he did not declare the matter finished. He stepped back. He left the center of the dais open. Then he looked at Verity. He yielded the floor. Verity felt the eyes of 1,000 people on her. She felt their judgment, their curiosity, their sudden shame. It pressed against her ribs like a hand. For one awful moment, the old silence called to her. The carriage, the locked room, the trunk beneath the bed. "No," she stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, she unbuttoned her plain leather traveling glove. She pulled it from her right hand, baring her fingers to the cold autumn air. Then she let the glove fall to the stone. She would not be covered. She would not be inspected. "I was sent away from this estate 3 months ago," Verity said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the hard dignity of a woman who had survived silence. "I was told I was unfit. I was told I was a risk to the order of this house." She looked directly at Lysander. He shrank beneath her gaze. Then she looked at the crowd. "I did not spend my exile weeping for a title. I spent it teaching the daughters of tenant families how to read." A murmur of surprise rippled through the tenants. "I will not return to this house as a corrected mistake," Verity said. "I will not return to hide behind high walls." She turned to Nathaniel. He watched her with his chest still, his eyes burning with respect so fierce it frightened her. "I will remain at Greywick, Your Grace, on one condition. The Old North schoolroom will be reopened tomorrow under my authority. No girl who lives on Greywick land will be bound by a paper she cannot read." The silence in the square was absolute. She was not begging for her place. She was claiming a realm of her own. Nathaniel looked at the woman who had stripped away his armor, his fear, and his pride. "The North schoolroom is yours, Verity," he said loud enough for every soul to hear. "Its accounts will be yours. Its keys will be yours. And this house will answer to the work you begin there, if you will have it." He bowed to her, a deep, formal bow. Not a husband permitting a wife, a duke honoring the woman he had failed to see. The square erupted, not in whispers of scandal, but in a rough, overwhelming roar from the tenants. Verity looked at Nathaniel as he straightened. He had not rescued her. He had leveled the ground so she could stand. But public honor was not private forgiveness. The assembly ended in fragments. Lysander left before Ellington could put another question to him. Delia's statement passed from hand to hand among the magistrate's friends. The tenants dispersed slowly, glancing back at Verity as if she had become someone they had to learn again. The heavy doors of Greywick Hall closed behind the Duke and his Duchess. They did not speak in the grand foyer. The force of the public square faded, leaving behind a fragile, terrifying truth. A marriage had to begin from the ruins. Nathaniel did not follow Verity to her chamber. He knew the boundaries now. It was hours later, as late afternoon warmed the windows, that Verity walked into the morning room. She stopped. Nathaniel sat at a small table near the fire. He had removed his heavy coat. His sleeves were rolled up, exposing his forearms. On the table lay the large, leather-bound register she had brought from Edinburgh, the book containing the names of her students. Beside it lay the ivory wedding glove she had packed away. Nathaniel held a needle and a spool of silk thread. He was attempting, with clumsy and terrible concentration, to thread the needle. The pearl button sat on the table. Verity watched him from the doorway. The great Duke of Greywick, a man who commanded thousands of acres, was struggling with silk thread because he wanted to mend what he had broken. He looked up and saw her. At once he lowered his hands and stood. "I brought the register down," he said. "I thought you might want to review the accounts for the new slates." He was nervous. The realization struck her softly. He was afraid of pushing her. Verity entered the room. She looked at the ivory glove, then at the thick silk ribbon attached to the register's spine used to mark the page. "You are trying to sew the button back on the glove." Nathaniel looked down. "I tore it off. It seemed right that I should put it back." "If you put it back on the glove," Verity said, stepping closer, "it will look as though it was never torn, as though the wedding night never happened." Nathaniel closed his eyes.
The pain on his face was raw. I would give my life to erase that night, Verity. I would not. He opened his eyes. If that night had not happened, she said, stopping just a breath from him, you would still be living in a prison of order. And I would still be a quiet, obedient ward waiting to be placed on a shelf. She picked up the pearl button. Then she picked up the needle he had finally managed to thread. She did not touch the glove. Instead, she held the button against the heavy silk ribbon of the school register. I do not want a flawless marriage, Nathaniel, she said, using his name. I want a true one. She held out the needle. Nathaniel looked at it, then at her face. He understood. She was not letting him erase the past. She was asking him to anchor it to her future. May? He asked. You may. Nathaniel stepped in and took the needle. His hand brushed hers. His fingers were warm, calloused, and trembling slightly. He bent over the table. With slow, careful stitches, he sewed the pearl button from her wedding glove onto the ribbon of the school register. When he tied off the thread, he stood. He did not grab her. He did not pull her into a desperate embrace. He stood before her, with nothing hidden. I want you, Verity. His voice was steady, now low with feeling, not as a spotless duchess, not as a corrected mistake. I want Verity Redmond Greywick, the woman I should have heard first, the woman who taught me how to live in my own house. He held out his hand, the same hand he had refused to take 3 months ago, the hand he had crossed England to offer. Verity looked at his palm, the lines of it, the warmth of it. She raised her hand, then stopped. Her fingers hung in the space between them, not touching him, not retreating. The memory came back with cruel precision, his sleeve beneath her fingertips on their wedding night, the turn of his face away from her, the sharp click of the pearl button striking the floor. Nathaniel did not move. He did not close the distance. He did not plead. He simply stood there, breathing shallowly, waiting for the judgment he had earned. Verity looked toward the door. She could leave. She could keep the school, keep her name, keep the safe silence she had built around herself. No one in this house could force her hand now. That was what made the choice real. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her bare fingers into his palm. Nathaniel's hand closed around hers. His grip was strong, anchoring, and infinitely gentle. He lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles. His eyes closed. Verity let out a long, unsteady breath. Not surrender, not forgetting. Choice. She squeezed his fingers and drew him one small step closer. Months later, in the bright, noisy north wing of Greywick Hall, a dozen girls dipped their pens in ink and practiced signing their names in the heavy leather register. Every time they opened the book, they turned past the thick silk ribbon marked by a single, gleaming pearl button. It no longer hid a hand. It marked the first page of a future Verity had chosen.